There we go. Right, so what we're going to do is, in an ideal world, the decal you would like to apply, they have created a transfer plate of it. So, for example, say you want this decal applied, they would create a transfer plate with multiple layers that are perfectly aligned. So, what I would then do is I would just simply grab a flat down object. That's important. And then you would hold Control and select everything. You can then move that around. Oops. Hello? Ah, that's why. If you make sure they are actually in the same plane. So grab a flat object, perfectly flat. Place your own if you're not sure. And then Control, drag click everything else. And you will transfer it over. And then you will work your way through, making everything selected correctly. So you will drag select certain things. What would it be for this decal? We would need to select the, oops. Select the grays, then the blacks. In our case. And then you can see there's circles here, and then we would have to deselect that. And we'd have to deselect this. If we then move these three pieces, the circles are in the right spot. And then we can grab our final three circles, transfer them down, center them, and then scale them to the size that they're supposed to be at. That is the easiest way. Obviously, this plate is supposed to be black. But that's the easiest way to transfer a decal, is you have a pre-existing transfer plate. Now, if we go into the specifics of what I did there, what we're going to do is, where is it? Where is it? So step one, generally speaking, when you put decals on a thing, because the decal limit is so small, you're going to want to make sure that you're maximizing your decal usage. So decal coverage, you'll see like 2,400 just with what I've got placed down here, which is not much. So the best way to maximize your decal usage is, well, first of all, optimize your decal to begin with. Make it just fewer decals that it's comprised of. You can see this decal has the overall shapes, two circles here. One square does pretty much all of the gray, and one square does the blacked out interior. Whereas an alternate version of it, you can see just how many more decals there are. So optimizing your decals will help you, but you're also going to want to drag them away from your ship. And the reason for that is because when you're doing decal work, your decals are actually not counted on the number of individual objects, but they are counted on instead the overall number of plates that they cover. So if you have a plate that is a boundary layer between the two, and you grab a single decal here, you'll notice we have down here 2,412. If it crosses over, it's 2,413. And that is because this decal is on two plates separately. So it's actually, when you copy this plate over here and copy that plate over here, you'll see it splits it into two different decals. And that's an important note to make. So you want to try and put decals on a single plate if possible. And when you are dragging them over, you're going to want to make sure that you are separating the plating off of your ship. Because decals, if you're doing complex stuff, can end up being three-dimensional and can cut through on the back. If we go over to some of the other stuff we have here, you'll see how some of this stuff hangs over the edge, looks through the sides, and that would be eating up your decal count. So step one is making sure you've separated it off the rest of your ship that you're transferring onto, because it'll help you maximize how many you can put on. Step two is going to be figuring out how you're going to transfer it on. In most cases, you're going to be transferring onto a flat surface, so it's probably fine. So we can go and grab a piece and begin the transferring. So I don't care too much about the alignment, but you're going to make sure that your transferring piece and your work piece that you want to put it onto are going to be on the same plane. So they are in line with each other here. Mouse move will not use the same shortcuts. It will be different. So for normal selection, shift clicking will add a selection, and then if you do that, control clicking will remove a selection, right? So if you try and do that with decals, it will not work. Control click is everything. Control click will add and remove your decals. In the decal mode, there's no separate key binding for it. Shift click is an exclusive select. So if you try and use shift click, you're only going to get the part that you're looking at. Whereas control click will add or remove depending dynamically on if it's already selected. It just toggles the selection on it. They are fundamentally different selection systems from moving parts normally. Now, what we showed a second ago is, let me grab a part that I know is flat. I can't place a new one. Yeah, this will do. So one thing to remember is when you're working with more complex shapes later on, you will find that certain decals work better as three-dimensional shapes. In our case, I don't think any of ours are, no, actually some of the central ones are 3D. But the some of the really complex stuff, if we go over to some of the intricate shapes here, you can see they are very 3D, and a lot of the decals are just cut in on the sides, and the reason that's done is to get smaller shapes. But the problem is global selection and local selection aren't differentiated in the decal mode right now. So if you go over and you have a decal that is sideways, for example, and you try and move it, well, you'll see that that move is not globally correct. If I go and change the transform mode, it doesn't change anything at all. If I change it via the numpad, the key binding, as you're supposed to do for moving and rotating mode, right? Because if you go to actual move mode and rotate mode, by clicking on it, it doesn't work. If you use the key bindings for it, they simply don't give you the correct rotation for your transforms. Now, the way you're going to fix that is with kind of a dummy decal. So the decal system will use the first decal that it has selected in order to move things or to get the movement sprue, which is these arrows here. So if we get rid of that, and we go make this a little bit easier to see. Oops, wrong thing. Right. So if we have a regular part here, normally your stuff will start off with rotation snap to surface and position snap to surface enabled. Specifically, you're going to want to disable these. When you're transferring decals, this will break it. The translational math behind these modes is fundamentally flawed. There is some sort of issue with it, and it will skew your decal. I will show you that now. If I select all of this and I start moving it around, you'll see... Hold on. See if I can get this to work. Yeah, there we go. So if you grab these and then move them around a bit, you'll notice it's a little bit subtle. I haven't moved it around a whole bunch here, but the left side is a bit narrower than the right. And that is, some of these decals, like this this square here, is significantly further to the left. Now, that's because of the snap to surface and rotation snap, primarily the snap to surface. So you're going to want to try and avoid using that when you're transferring decals. It's not going to help you any. If I quickly go and grab myself our logo pack again, we're going to place this in nice and aligned. We have our dummy transfer decal, which is just a flat surface decal that has been position and rotation snapped. Placed down perfectly square with the world. And we're then going to control select all of the other decals. Now, this is a little difficult for complex decals, but with the mode disabled, we can move this around and we don't have to worry about it losing position. You can see these are nice and the same width. So once you're happy with the overall position of your decal, you can get rid of this dummy transfer decal. It's kind of pointless now. And now you enter into the painful part of things, where you need to figure out exactly how you're going to transfer this in. So you're going to find out which layers are your bottom layers and figure out which layers are your top layers. So you need to know precisely what layers should be above each and which layers should be below. And you're going to work your way backwards. So for this white square, this big white square, should be the bottommost layer. So I'm going to correct that with these little black squares. Then these two white ones should be the next layer. At which point the next layer should be cleaning up the mess of the overspray here. So, oops. We're going to move them, Control Z. Keep in mind, anytime you move a decal, it will turn it to the topmost layer, if you move it at all. And that includes undo. So, if you make a mistake, you're kind of screwed. As much as you might not want to hear that. The best practice, if you are working on something for the first time or prototyping, is you're going to want to create copies while you do so. If you create a bunch of copies constantly, you'll find that if you do make a mistake, you can always double back. Now, obviously, there's a little bit of overspray on the top here, and there's going to be a little bit of overspray on the bottom. You can clean that up with other decals later, or if it's supposed to sit flush, that's fine. The particular decals I used for the side posts here are really quite tall, so you might want to grab an extra square here and cover that up. But now this plate is ready to be moved into position, and you can mount that on your ship and rebolt it in. And the reason we took it off again is because that overspray, right? These decals do stick up a good bit, and if this was mounted in this way right now, you would have the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 decals extra used in your decal budget. just because they poked up high enough. When you are working with more intricate stuff, you're going to want to start using three-dimensional decals, and by that I mean when you're designing, you will actually disable your rotation snap to surface, and you will start lifting it off of the edge of your workpiece. And what that results in, if I can find it, a good example, I will use some of Triglift's decal pack stuff. No, mirroring is not implemented for anything right now. There is... Play the F5 game to get my folder back. So when you start getting into particularly intricate parts, you can see here that when we're level with the surface here, but almost every one of these pokes off of the surface because it allows you more control over which part of the decal is shown. If I go over to... where is it? Yeah, that's one. If I grab my Geth Armory's logo here, you'll see that I have a triangle here, and I can move this around a little bit. I'll actually paint this red. Oops. So, with it being tilted, you can actually control what parts of the decal will be going through the plate. And this gives you much finer control of where to position the decal, but it also gives you much finer control over the shape of the decal. So if you need a particularly small section, then there is no way to get a decal narrow enough to do this line natively in the game. There just isn't. But if you make a decal stick straight in, you can achieve that. As for other tricks, you can get very small triangles. If we go over here, just clear this out of the way a little bit. So we can get an extremely small not circle, jeez. We can get an extremely small triangle by lifting this out of the surface. Oops, just about. So you can get triangles that would otherwise be, one, impossible due to the shape. This is, isosceles? Yeah. Where all sides are different lengths on this triangle. And, you know, we can fix that. I think is the correct way of placing this particular one. So you can get very, very small decals that are just otherwise not possible with the default shapes. If we go over here and grab one. Actually, this does not use those triangles. You'll just have to take my word for that, though. That there's no way for you to get the normal triangle piece that size. Using a square piece also nets you the bonus of not having an anti-aliased edge. So if I come over here, what I mean by that is the default decals have like a weird gray line around them where it's an edge that's been anti-aliased. And you can see it particularly bad over here. The resolution is really not great. However, the square, on the other hand, is quite good. So if you're using this, you'll see you have really jagged lines, gray borders, and you can see a bunch of lines cutting through on all of these parts where there's intersections of diagonal lines. The circles also have those anti-aliased edges. They are a little more subtle, but they do have them. So one of the tricks to getting around that is never using the parts with anti-aliased edges to begin with. Now you can see this corner here of the square does not have any anti-aliased edges whatsoever. It is truly flawless as far as the renderer is concerned. No anti-aliasing on these edges that you can tell. It's much, much higher resolution, which leads to a cleaner image. What else is there that'll majorly help you out? Your selection, as I mentioned, the first thing you select will determine... You can see this thing is clearly lifted off the surface, but as I mentioned, here's a more obvious view of it, where it will select the first part that you use. So the sprue is all crooked and fucked up because I have selected this one first. You can see it's in line with the first decal, but if I go to this one, now it is still diagonal, but it is flat with the rest of the plate. That's what I'll probably do with this one, is throw that up on YouTube for you. So if I select the square one, then everything ends up being nice and squared up perfectly, and we can move these around just fine. If I can try and show off, maybe this one will show it a little bit better because it's comprised of more decals independently. If I go over here and I grab all of these decals, and then I use the snap mode and I just try and drag that on. Oops. And just try and exaggerate the bug to give you an idea of what it's doing here. So if I go over here now, you'll see everything's all messed up. And if I push it back up over here, it will change the size on that a little bit as you move it around. And everything's now kind of getting a little bit crooked and out of whack. And this doesn't look like the decal we had initially at all. And the reason it doesn't is because we have these two tick boxes in the tool options enabled. So make sure before you do any decal movements, you disable these. I highly recommend you disable these. It'll save you a lot of headache if you're moving multiple decals. Because if you don't, they will not stay aligned to each other correctly. They will just kind of go where they want. But if you do make sure that those are unchecked, then you can move them over. Let me actually repaint this before we do. You can see a little bit better the anti-aliased edges I was talking about earlier. You can see I can be, as aggressive as I want with where I move that, and that will stay perfectly aligned now because these two checkboxes are unticked. Now, one thing you might want to keep in mind while you're designing a decal is while the three-dimensional decal shapes can help you achieve extremely small parts, no, I don't have that saved. You can also use them to make your job easier for your layer selection. One thing you'll keep in mind is transferring decals is a pain in the neck. And you will have some situations where there are particularly complex decals, like this one here, where you have 3D decals sticking out over top of other decals that exist. And that'll make accessing the L, A, N, and D extremely hard, particularly the A and the D, because there's concentric squares here. So choosing which one of these two squares to select is difficult. It's always going to favor one of them. You can use depth to your advantage. If you have, say, two squares, you can... I will try and make it a little bit more obvious. You can press this into the wall a little bit, and then take this one and press it out of the wall. So that way the depth, this one's on the surface. If I grab our CA decal pack that we provide, there we go. This one is a little bit better at showing that off. So because these decals are so much taller, you can see it a little bit better. But the decals have a three-dimensional shape. These ones are accentuated and much taller than the others. But you can see how they do have a physical 3D volume that they fill up. Now, if we take this one over here, for example, and we put the surface of it close to the surface of our plate, and we take this one over here, and we put the surface of it, we shrink it down and put the surface of it above, then when we try and select it, obviously the part that's on the top will get selected. So we can choose whichever one we want freely. If we, however, accidentally did that the other way around, then we're going to have a near impossible time selecting the other one. When you try and select it, you can see it will only select the outside layer. There's no way for me to select the lower one other than drag clicking. If you drag select, it will select everything underneath it. But you can see other things that we didn't intend to select also get chosen. So we'd have to deselect everything very carefully so that we can move this one part. And you can see with where our cursor is, we've clearly selected something else down there as well. A couple of somethings down there, actually. And now we can move that part that's below it. The same thing works with the regular square decals over here. They are much smaller, but they do function the same way overall. If we... yeah. There we go. So you can select the outside one, move it over here, select the inside one, move it around. But if you do it the other way around, put this one further in, and we pull this one further out. Thanks for the gift sub, Sprucer. Really appreciate that, man. You can see if we do it the opposite direction now, again, we have to drag select to grab the one on the bottom. It's a pain in the neck, and I really recommend that if you're designing your decals from the first time, make sure that you're using these layers effectively. The other thing that I would mention is when possible, for example, right here, you can see that this is two concentric squares, the black square in the background here. The white square is a concentric square on the inside, but notice that we're not actually using all of the background here. We're using these as 3D decals. One thing that you can do with these two decals is this white square could have been made bigger, in fact, the same size, so that a corner would poke out around it, so you'd have a little tab to grab onto either side of them. So in the case of over here, you can see exactly that being done. You can see this decal is easier to grab because while it's directly below, or well, actually this decal is below this one, it doesn't matter because there's a little tab sticking through. Now, this decal doesn't have to go this far up. It can actually be tucked down over here. Technically, this decal can be like right there. But then we'd have no way of really selecting it easily on this side of it if this area down below was cluttered up. So if I were to place it there, this decal would actually be quite difficult to select, potentially. The final big trick to getting your decals to look the way they want is decal rotation. Yes. Decal rotation is a pain in the neck because decals only rotate on a 5-degree increment. Now, if I can find the part, maybe I have it lying around. Nope. Gotta play the F game here. Decals, where is it? Visor Fury, top front panel. Okay. So, there will sometimes be certain decals that you just can't achieve the rotations that you need for. For example, if I go over here and grab this piece, you can see what I mean by sometimes decals that are 3D go through the backside. And that's why you want to pull the plates completely off your ship before transferring them. However, you'll notice that if I overlay these two plates, this decal setup for the little rocket here is pointing not quite square. You can particularly see it if I rotate it around, where it's a little bit crooked. And there's no way around that. Not natively with the decal system. If you try and rotate these decals, you will never achieve a closer lineup that's perfectly square through the center of this ring. It's not possible. However, what you can do is you can rotate a plate. So, you can go over here, and you can grab this plate here as a transfer plate, for example. And if I can get it to snap. Right. So what we can do is we can go into the plate rotations and make that 91.27. Oops, turn off snapping. 91.27. Oh, that's the wrong. Hold on. So you can see now this plate is rotated over 1.27 degrees. So if we grab the vertex here and snap it in, now we have a flat surface that is 1.27 degrees out of spec. You can see how that is just imperceptibly curved, but it is definitely and obviously not level. And the only way to do that is by rotating a plate. So, with that in mind, there will also be times where you want to transfer a decal onto a not necessarily 90-degree surface, and that can be a pain in the neck as well. So what you'll need to do for that, like for example, the decal work that has been done on the 240 288 by 384 piece here, I grabbed this decal plate here, and I aligned it to the side. Now, I think it was something... what I did is I just kind of eyeballed it over. And what you do is you actually enter in the fine coordinate transform. So you use the rotation tool and specifically enter in the exact value that you need. So I think I worked this out to be like 26.5 something degrees. Maybe? Yeah, I think it was. So if I level this out, just because the rotation tool natively is a little bit weird, sometimes it uses delta, sometimes it doesn't. Whoops. 26.57. Sometimes it also uses the wrong values. So you see I'm entering into the X field and it's outputting in Z. Just be aware it does stupid stuff like that with the plate rotation tool. So we're going to move that over, and you're going to do the you're going to do the trigonometry to find out exactly what the angle is for your piece. I just happen to remember that for mine. But you would do something like grabbing your plate here, and you can work your way into figuring out exactly how big this plate is. So for our cases, the interior diameter of this triangle is 144 centimeters tall by 288 centimeters wide. So that is a 2-to-1 triangle. I mean, you can punch that in on your calculator with 144 by 288 to get the angle that this slope is going to be at, and you can rotate your plate to fit that angle. And that's how you can transfer onto a surface that is anything but a clean 5-degree increment. Other than that, there's worth mentioning that there are decals that exist from closed alpha that are not available in the game. And some of these decals can be quite helpful, but if you're going to use them, I wouldn't expect them to stick around. They've been removed from the asset browser for a reason, and I would not bet on them staying in the game. So if you are going to use them, be prepared for the decal to just disappear one day. I'm not saying it will, it may never, but they were removed from the asset browser and technically we're not supposed to have them. So be prepared for that if you're going to make new stuff with them. If you are going to use them though, you can get some very useful parts like little pinstripes here that can be used to get intricate work done, as well as using them as just a 3D box. So if you want to wrap around a edge of a plate, instead of using 3 decals currently, where you'd have one square on the edge hanging over, a second square on the face, and then a third square on the bottom hanging over as well. With these closed alpha decals, some of them are 3-dimensional, and you can just stick them over the edge, and that'll work as a single decal used. So you can save a little bit of decal count using some of the old stuff. You can also use some of the more interesting things here and layer them. So if you grab some of these decals, if we move this over, paint this decal black, give it a little bit of mud look to it, and you can see that that already looks pretty good. Probably want to actually wrap it around the other way and put the gray on top of the black undercoat, but some of these decals can end up looking pretty good actually, all things considered. And you can end up with some muddy textures on your chips, a little bit of orange peel, or some scratches. And these can be all painted in so they don't look super aggressive, and they're a little bit harder to spot, or they can be made really aggressive. Personally, my favorite is using the dirt and painting them red, because it looks kind of like blood. I know one of our community members, Chief, actually paints his black to look like oil spills. But there are more decals out there that you can get your hands on if you know where to look. And there are just shapes that don't exist otherwise, like these ones. Some of the old decals also have alpha mapping in them, which is important to note because alpha mapping makes it look more 3-dimensional, like it has depth to it. So if you look close here, it kind of looks like this is actually engraved into the surface and it's stippled over. Now, if you were to put another decal on top of that, that alpha mapping would remain. So, for example, if we show that off real quick, I believe this one will work here. Yes. So if we go in universe, you can see that you can layer some decals where the yellow, you can see it's got its own small tiny triangles in the bottom there. You can see the little tiny triangles here. But you can also see that the black makes it much more prominent that you have the stippling from the layer below. So alpha mapping will stay presented on top. You can use that for some interesting effects like this, where it doesn't show very well on the yellow, but it shows phenomenally well on the black, particularly under light. I think that's, for the most part, pretty much all of the tricks I can teach you and just be mindful, as far as advice is concerned, be mindful that certain parts will cut through the back of your ship and continue onto other layer or other plates, and be aware that you have rotation of a plate to rotate parts, and you will want to try and be mindful of how you're going to transfer the decal later. For some plates, well, for some decals, it might be advantageous to create a transfer plate, which is just a little plate with multiple parts that, because transferring these concentric circles would be next to impossible with the way that this decal has been designed, I've yet to be able to do it. What you do is you actually save it as two different files, or well, as a single file, but as two different plates, and then you can move them later. As just a quick refresher for how to get things to be concentric and work nicely, and get your desired output that can be easily transferred onto any other plate. Hopefully that gives you a bit of a poke in the right direction as far as decal stuff is concerned. Decals can be very finicky and troublesome, but there are guys out there, like Triglyph, for example, who have done a absolutely phenomenal job with decals. So Triglyph has shown up in our community and delivered an absolute amazing work of art for a lot of these decals. So if you're looking for somebody for advice, definitely, stop by the stream or go check out what he's doing. You can probably get in touch with him on Discord. I think it's Suoma, if I'm saying that correctly, or Triglyph on Twitch is how I've been able to get in contact with him. And all of this stuff is his work. So you can see some of the really intricate designs that he's managed to pull off with multiple layers that have no business being that close with the normal, like, two-dimensional style of doing decals, where it's just stickers on top of each other. You can see the side effects of using 3D decals poking through the sides. So just be aware of those limitations of the system.